Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Welcome back to the Daily Dose of Doom and Gloom, the abridged version, because it's Sunday and we all got better things to do, so I'm going to try to keep this short and sweet, meaning that it's probably going to be a half an hour, so sit tight. Here we go. We have the UK sending out an emergency alert to millions of people simultaneously, obviously priming people for when the bombs fall. This was a nuclear drill. Most people don't see it as that, but that's exactly what it was. I've been talking about how they're going to be doing this test for the last couple months. They finally did it today. It went off mostly without a hitch, although some people didn't get the memo. Not that it would matter anyways, because where are you going to hide in the UK? Make sure you have a boat. Make sure you have a bug-out plan. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, but it's looking as though that NATO is pushing us in that direction because Jens Stoltenberg goes to Ukraine and effectively declares war on Russia. A couple days ago, we released a video entitled as such, and the reason why I did that is because that's exactly what NATO did when they have now essentially committed to bringing Ukraine, incorporating them into NATO at some point in the future. Just last year, Biden said that this was something that would never ever happen because, of course, it's a major red line for the Russians. This is part of the agreements that they came to after the Soviet Union collapsed, that NATO would never mind go all the way to Ukraine, but move an inch eastward, although some people say that was not formally documented or whatever the case might be. But this is a red line for the Russians. This is why they have to lock in this buffer zone. If they can't, it's going to be nuclear Armageddon, or in the very least, a limited tactical nuclear exchange. Hopefully we just get a hybrid war, cyber attack, maybe an EMP, maybe we get off lucky. But that's what's going on. We got a variety of other things that we're going to talk about today. Make sure you go and check out the video that's playing behind me after this one. If you want a condensed version of everything I've been talking about for the past year and a half now to people, if you want to present one video to them that condenses all of the escalatory events and shows us how we've come from a place of relative peace and stability in early 2022 to bring on the brink of thermonuclear war right now, there is no better video than the one we released a couple days ago entitled A Timeline for Nuclear War. Okay, that really puts it in perspective, because when you're looking at this stuff day to day, it's very hard to see the growth. I mean, for most people, they're going to be missed by the fact that Stoltenberg and NATO basically just said that Ukraine is going to be a member, when a year ago it would have been unthinkable to say that. There's so many things like that that have happened, whether it's tanks and planes and, U.S. troops on the ground, directing strikes into Russia, green lighting strikes into Russia, which has just happened in the past day as well. So it's escalating out of control. Please continue prepping and go and check out that video. I'll post a link in the pinned comment and the description section. Let's just rip right through this, because like I say, we all got better stuff to do today. It is Sunday and I don't want to be stuck in here doing this. So let's go. As I said, UK preparing the population for nuclear war. NATO effectively declares war on Russia by pledging that they will eventually bring Ukraine into the NATO fold. We have a mass expulsion of Russian diplomats from Germany and vice versa. The Russians did the same. We also have irregular amounts of DEFCON activity, which has become commonplace now, signaling that we are in fact at a much higher state of combat readiness, contrary, and it's important to remember, I was going to say contrary to what the government says, but it's important to remember that DEFCON is totally classified anyways, so we wouldn't know what the DEFCON level is. You really have to pay attention to the birds in the sky, for which there is many, be it surveillance aircraft in and around the Russian region, our surveillance aircraft close to Kaliningrad that has pretty much been constant for the past few days, as well as just a lot of irregular amount of activity with the E-6 planes and the command and control planes in the sky, the doomsday planes, all of the nuclear exercises that have been run and appear to be continuing and not stopping being run, not counting all of the anomalous events that have been happening at military bases in the past week, with bases being put into lockdown. We're talking about the Center for Stratcom, the Center for Strategic Command in the United States, was put on lockdown over fears of an active shooter situation. It turned out it was just a car backfiring or something like that. Nonetheless, we're seeing these very, very peculiar things happening, like the firing of 6 high-ranking officers at the U.S. missile silos, and the list goes on and on and on. These are things that you would see when they're starting to dust off the strategic arsenal and get us back on a Cold War footing. That's exactly what is happening. Now, Ukraine is said to have initiated the counteroffensive in the Kherson direction. They've crossed over the river. I'm going to show you some maps, and they are apparently preparing some blitzkrieg maneuver of sorts, which of course has a lot of historical significance considering they're going to be using German tanks to do it, and considering that the German defense minister, and that's why I have written here, NATO greenlights Ukraine to attack Russia, he has basically given his blessing to Ukraine to start targeting inside Russia. So think about that for a second, okay? Think about that as we approach Russia's Victory Day parade, which they're not going to be having this year, which is very mysterious in itself, considering that they had a Victory Day parade even when the Germans were right outside the gates in World War II. But anyways, they're green-lighting attacks now of the Ukrainians to use drones into Russia, which they've been doing for some time. But now, of course, NATO is saying go for it. And this is more significant because for the first time ever, they actually used a US-made Sidewinder drone in Belgorod just the other day. And many people would speculate that they're using NATO satellites and military intelligence and possibly military personnel to actually direct these drones. Anyways, that's pure speculation. Everybody's got a theory about everything nowadays. Russia sending intermediate nukes to border, at least they're mulling that. So they're mulling sending more intermediate range nuclear missiles to their borders, meaning that they've already, basically committed to it, or they've already how should I say this? They've already have the missiles on the border already, basically. So they're either already made the decision or the missiles are already there. That's typically how these things have been run. Whenever they come out either side and say, yeah, we're thinking about doing something, they've either already done it or they've already greenlit it. Anyways, Russia's hypersonic annihilation of NATO officers. Some people are saying, and some leaks allegedly claim, although we don't know what of the leaks are true and what isn't, that the Russians utilized a hypersonic weapon and took out over 100 NATO officers in some bunker in Lviv in the western part of Ukraine. Now, the Russians haven't taken any credit for this, which you think they would, especially at this point in time. I think they need to be boosting morale in any way they can. Some people say that they didn't want to claim responsibility because it would have led to a major escalation in the conflict, and that a lot of the people in Washington would be pressing for more intervention, thereby leading to ultimately a nuclear exchange. But I'm not entirely sold on this issue. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't, maybe it was just a dozen or so. Regardless, if you're talking about NATO commanders being killed in a hypersonic missile attack, that's obviously a wake-up call to NATO that this is not Afghanistan or Iraq, okay? As I said, Russia is suspending all Victory Day activities, which is suspicious. Historically, they wouldn't do such a thing. And maybe does that mean that they're concerned about national security? Does that just mean that they're short on manpower and they don't want to commit? One thing I don't have written here is that today Kadyrov, the Chechen leader, who is now like third or fourth in command of the Russian military apparently, said that they're going to be sending another contingent of Russian troops, a regiment, so up to about 1,000 guys, essentially, to Ukraine for whatever sort of defensive or offensive maneuvers they're imagining in the future here. We have the election cycle coming up next year. How is that going to factor into this conflict? There's never been a lame duck president during wartime. So is this going to compel our leaders to maybe get the war going even more, spread the war further and farther? It's likely that we're not going to see an end to this conflict, I think. I think that's a guarantee, in the very least, until after the election, whoever is in charge. Now, there's a lot of changeover happening in Europe with, people, blue squares being turned red. Right now, Macron, the French leader, is worried about Le Pen coming up. She's the more right-wing leader. Some people have their hopes that this person is going to be more willing to go to the negotiating table with Putin. But just remember, they said the same thing about the Italian leader, Meloni, whatever her name is. they thought that she would be more willing to negotiate with Putin, and it turned out to be the complete opposite. So I'm not getting my hopes up for any of that. They're all on the same team, essentially. Japan is on high alert over a North Korean spy satellite launch. They're worried about the rocket used to launch that satellite falling on their territory and getting their missile defense set up so that they can shoot it down if need be. I think it's going to be a big nothing burger, but it's just showing you how both sides are becoming more entrenched. So you have the Japanese starting to really get more aligned with the South Koreans and the Americans and the Taiwanese. In Canada, we had a gold heist here, okay? So there was $20 million worth of gold that just mysteriously went missing from Pearson Airport. And they know nothing. They have no clues. Apparently, they know absolutely nothing about this heist. It's totally incredible, but it's not surprising that we don't care much about gold here in this country, considering that we have zero gold reserves. Yes, you heard right. We literally have zero, not an ounce of gold in our reserves. A G7 nation with, I think, the fourth or fifth largest in the ground stockpiles of gold in the world. We don't have any. We are totally beholden to the US dollar fiat reserve currency system. If that goes down, we go down with it. Don't ask me why. They're saying, oh, it costs money to hold gold in the banks. Yes, but it's called risk mitigation. Anyways, so a couple months ago, I warned people. I said, yeah, the UK is going to be sending out this emergency message. Sure enough, everybody called me Chicken Little, and here we go today. They finally did it, okay? And this is exactly what you would expect in the run-up. These very, very subtle mental preparations, getting people primed for in a preparedness sort of way. And you'll start seeing, preparedness signs pop up around the UK, I'm sure. Make sure you have your 72-hour kit, because when the smoke clears, the government's going to have to deal with it. And the less people they have to deal with, the better. So the more people they can save, it's in their best interest to try at least to, get the population prepared without scaring them. That's the whole nuclear PSA that New York sent out last year. It looked like it was made by a couple interns in an afternoon. But it has the effect of getting people thinking about it without putting them in a state of frenzy and panic, and just slowly kind of time releasing that. And this is going to coincide with the escalation of events. Because understand, it was the leader of the UK military, the army chief last year, who said that British troops must be capable of defeating Russia in battle, essentially talking about preparing to go to war with the Russians. And I even think he went so far as saying you need to be prepared to part ways with your family at a moment's notice, which was a stunning admittance that, we're potentially that close to going to war with the Russians. Anyways, a lot of people were very spooked by this message. This has been a technology that's been employed here for a very long time in Canada, over 5 years. It's been employed many other places. In fact, in Florida, just a few days ago, they woke up their entire population at 4:45 in the morning when they accidentally sent out an emergency alert at that time of day. Everybody in the UK who's not familiar with this, they were worried, is this going to cause gridlock? Is this going to cause a system? It was kind of like this Y2K level of scare. I never interpreted it that way. I just know that this is basically preparing. This is the new air raid siren. Okay, that's all this is. It's not a conspiracy for the government to hack your phone. They already have, UK is a synopticon through and through, or a panopticon and a synopticon. Panopticon is when you have, it's an old prison design where you basically can see everything that's going on in the prison from a center point in the prison. The synopticon is people policing themselves, people ratting themselves out. That's almost more of a communist era thing where, you would have narcs everywhere who would rat people out if they were, being disloyal to the party or whatever. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that the sole purpose of this, because I can't think of many other emergencies that are going to emerge in the UK aside the odd heat wave and flood, this is to prepare the population for nuclear war, to prepare the population for when the bombs drop. In China, in fact, they have similar apps, but they actually tell you which fallout shelter to go to. I don't even know if they have fallout shelters in the UK anymore. I would say if you can get one, maybe now's the time to do it. I can't believe I'm saying this, but if you can find a way to get underground and have a good shield against the gamma radiation, a good 3 feet of Earth shield. Just have it as a contingency plan. Let's hope it doesn't happen. But at this point in time, it might be a good time to rewatch the movie Threads if you want to see exactly how horrendous a nuclear war would be. In fact, we're well overdue for another World War III movie. I'm almost wondering why Hollywood hasn't seized upon this moment. And I've kind of speculated, and this is when I get a little conspiratorial, maybe they don't want to spook the population out of support for this conflict. So they don't want to release the litany of nuclear war movies just yet. Maybe they're holding off until this situation dies down. But we haven't had a rerun of Threads or what's the other one, The Day After, in almost 40 years. So I think it's only a matter of time before they try to put that in perspective again. Now, the next story of the day, this is a big story, confirmed by Pentagon leak. Russian hypersonic missiles wipe out U.S. NATO secret command in Kiev. Dozens of top U.S. officers vaporized on March 9th. According to sources familiar with the political behind the scenes of Banderstadt, the blow fell on the bunker control and planning centers as well as on air defense radar. Insiders reported heavy losses among the officers. Now, I heard about this months ago, but you can never confirm anything like this, Everybody's coming out and preaching this like it's the gospel and it's a sure thing. Well, why aren't the Russians posting about it? I've heard that the reason why the Russians are not taking credit for it, if in fact it did happen, is because they are worried about triggering a response. They don't want to draw too much attention to it, much like the people who are in the know in the United States don't want to draw attention to the fact that they were there orchestrating this stuff. So neither side wants it to go nuclear. So it's almost as if, and this is a good thing, that maybe there are some forces operating inside the Kremlin and Washington who are aware of how quickly this situation can spiral out of control if the mob takes over and if the mob starts demanding more intervention. And in terms of NATO, that would obviously look like potential troops on the ground, more funding, more weapons, long-range weapons, who knows. We have this situation where Stoltenberg goes to Ukraine and basically says, allies agree, Ukraine will become a member. Just last year, they said this was never going to happen, that this is off the table. No, NATO will not become a member. I think Joe Biden said that explicit thing. So this is how far we've come. So anybody who thinks that I'm exaggerating, go and watch my video I released 2 days ago, and you can add this onto the end. In fact, I think we caught this, and I think we added that into, this was the last event, the last data point in that video, and rightly so. And we talked also about the expulsion of diplomats, 20 German diplomats. There's not many diplomats remaining right now in these countries on either side of the fence. And once all the diplomats go, that's basically when it's time to go to war. And as the rate at which diplomats leave increases because both sides are concerned with espionage. And as trust begins to wane, that's when either side are going to become more suspicious, and they're going to want to drastically limit the amount until it's only one ambassador there or whatever, the main ambassador, envoy, whatever he's called. All right, so David Petraeus says that Ukrainians are preparing a colossal attack against the Russian army with the ultimate goal of Crimea. So what they want to do is they want to, I don't have my fortifications map up here, but allegedly they've crossed the bridge here. Supposedly, they've crossed the bridge. I know Russia had some artillery systems here. Maybe they have pulled them back, but they are heavily, heavily fortified from this region all the way to Crimea. So it's going to be a bloody mess if the Ukrainians do attempt to do this blitzkrieg maneuver. There are animations that show what ideally their plan would be, but understand that if this happens, if they go through with this counteroffensive in the way that Petraeus is talking about, and they do have some success in doing so, here's a better map to communicate what's going on, then that's when things get really, really tense, okay? That's when Russia is on the back foot, potentially, but Russia are historically counterpunchers. So this may just be part of the strategy. They let them come in, they absorb the hit, and they let the Ukrainians exhaust themselves, then they come back in with a counterpunch. Understand that they have hundreds of thousands of troops in this region right now, including some Chechens who are there, as well as more Chechens that are coming, according to General Kadyrov, who's sending another regiment of Chechens in today. I believe they're the ones that fought in the Grozny War, in fact. So there's some pretty top-tier troops that they're sending in there. So this war is going to get very, very crazy in the next month ahead. I think that the markets are going to reflect that. I think that we're going to see more shoot downs of drones and spy planes because the Americans are still flying drones close to Crimea. And eventually that, at this point in time, I don't think anybody's playing stupid anymore. Everybody knows that NATO's fighting this war against the Russians, and NATO knows it, and the Russians know it. And I think all we can do now is keep on prepping. It's gotten so bad that the Wagner Group boss has told his mercenaries not to take any prisoners anymore. Just get rid of everybody in the Bakhmut region. We will KILL everyone on the battlefield, take no more prisoners of the war, apparently in a audio recording that went out on Telegram. Was that AI? Who knows? It's so hard to say nowadays what's real and what isn't. Estonia, Commander-in-Chief of the Estonian Defense Forces. What have they got, like 4 million people there or something? Anyways, they say that Russia must break up into small states. So there's no better way to get a target on your back than by saying something like that, especially when the leader of Russia is currently considered a war criminal and Russia is considered a terrorist state. The Foreign Ministry, and this is Russia now, announced its readiness to increase the missile potential on the western border. Russia may consider its position on non-deployment of medium-range, intermediate-range, or long-range ballistic missiles on the western border, basically the one that borders the Baltic states. Okay, and that's why I put this story right next to this one. And if they're thinking about that, then you know that they've already green-lit it, or the missiles are already there. And this infrastructure situation with the suspicions of Russian warships surveying the offshore critical infrastructure, that could be something else that is related to this emergency alert messaging. So maybe there's an emergency alert, a power outage caused by Russia taking out some undersea cables, or a gas supply shortage, or whatever the case is. I think in Europe, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, they use a lot of natural gas also for air conditioning. So Europe, who's been seeing record high temperatures pretty much every year for the past 10 years, is likely to have a very, very hot summer. And if they don't have air conditioning, they're going to end up using a lot of natural gas and just a lot of energy, period. Moscow says that they will never forgive this move by the USA. That's pretty strong words considering all that's happened right now. And he's talking about the refusal of visas to Russian journalists. That these are pretty strong words for simply not allowing journalists into the country. In light of everything else that's went on and all the things that they could get in a tiff about, the fact that they're getting in a tiff about that is interesting. There was some talk that Russia had replaced its commanders of the Pacific and Baltic Fleet. Basically, when you turn 65 in the Russian military, you get the boot, and that's what happened. So that's why they replaced that guy. That's why Shoigu went out and did that surprise inspection, likely to kind of bridge the changeover to the new commander, who is actually the former commander of the Baltic Fleet, and they got a new guy in the Baltic Fleet right now. So obviously just a lot of stuff happening all over the world. Chinese new defense minister, or wasn't the defense minister, Beijing's ambassador in Paris called into question the sovereignty of former Soviet republics. So you know how they were talking about Macron went to China and everything's all good with China and Europe now? Clearly it isn't, because China is now in the hot seat because their ambassador to Paris basically said that Crimea was a part of Russia because it was historically. While the implication would be then that Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, to some extent or another, were also Russian. Okay, and that's what they're concerned about. Needless to say, China's ambassador to Paris asked to be declared persona non grata over the words about Crimea. So you can see the rift already starting there, even though Macron just went there and everything was supposedly Just fine, right? Apparently not. What else do we need to talk about? Oh yeah, Joseph Borrell, the head of the EU foreign policy chief, has said that we need to send more warships to the Taiwan Strait in solidarity with Taiwan. So you can see that this is a war between NATO and the East. This is it. Some people want it spelled out for them. They're not going to tell you that we're at war. The wars don't get declared anymore, okay? They just happen. It's kind of like a recession. By the time we're in a recession, they'll be talking about when are we going to get out of this recession. They'll never admit that there's a recession. Okay, it's always going to be, there's not a recession, there might be a recession, there might be a recession, and then all of a sudden one day you're going to turn on the TV, when are we going to get out of this recession? So it's just going to be, when are we going to stop this war? It's the same thing. They're never going to admit to it. They don't want to spook the population. Not really going to talk too much about Taiwan today or this Japanese situation. There's been a lot of stuff going on. The Eastern Theater is developing. I mean, you got the Russians sending over bombers over Tokyo. So it's going to play out exactly how you would think. North Korea, China, Russia versus South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, and the United States, and a lot of these other countries, Philippines. You know, that's what it's going to be. That's what it's shaping up to be anyways. As for this gold situation, let's just briefly talk about this. This gold went missing from Pearson Airport. There's just a dumbfounding amount of lack of information. They don't know. Here are some key facts that remain unknown. They don't know the origin of the flight, the airline that operated the flight, although they think it was Air Canada. How could you not know this? The destination of the gold, they didn't know. If the gold was in bar form or bullion, exactly what the other high value items were, who owned the gold and other items that were stolen, if the gold and other items are still in Canada or have been moved to another country, how many suspects were involved in the heist. And they don't care, guys, because guess what? We have zero gold. Go ask Google how much gold, and this is hilarious. I had to do a double take. I thought there must be at least Australia has like 80 tons or something, right? All the former Commonwealth countries, it seems. Maybe they're sending it all. Maybe it's true. Maybe there are reptilian shape-shifting gold miners that are just trying to keep all the gold from themselves and they're taking it off planet. Who knows? That's a joke. That's a joke, okay? But it's suspicious that a country with 2,300 tons or known tons, I think that's tons, of gold in the ground, and it looks like we're, 7th or 8th in the world in terms of how much gold we have. We don't have any gold. We just export it all. And they're saying that the reason why they do that is because, it costs too much. It costs too much to keep gold. Kind of that Warren Buffett line of thinking. Russia, to the contrary, increased their gold reserves during 2022. Central banks, more broadly, bought a record 1,136 tons of gold last year. 1,000 tons. If you don't know, that's a lot. That's more than all the gold that's in Switzerland. Russia before that only had 2,300 tons. So they added nearly 50% more gold last year alone, which puts them ahead technically of France, Italy, and possibly Germany in terms of how much gold they have. And of course, they also have gold in the ground. In fact, they have the second most amount of gold in the ground. And that makes you wonder, is there, knowing this, knowing the countries that have the gold and that they're primary exporters of gold, if you wanted to take attention away from the gold market and keep the value of gold down, Russia stands to gain from gold going up because they're sitting on 6,800 tons of this stuff, known tons. And don't tell me that they've surveyed that entire country. Australia is sitting on the most amount of gold, 8,400 tons. So crazy, crazy stuff is going on. We're going to bring on a guest in the not so distant future to talk about Bill C-11 because, guys, my time here might be limited. And I'm not even joking anymore. It's reaching a point where it's getting very, very scary in this country. Oftentimes when people say things like that, it's encouched in some sort of political pitch. But I'm telling you right now, we're reaching totalitarian levels here. If they don't honor their word and don't come after social media, which I don't think they will right away because it will be obvious hypocrisy, and I don't think they would come after me right away. But the interesting thing about this situation with Bill C-11 is that YouTube is actually encouraging us to speak out about it. Typically, when something like this happens, you have unanimosity between the governments and the corporations. Typically, it's the little guy versus both of them, and they're both working together in some sort of fascistic sort of way. But this time, it's YouTube who doesn't want this policy to go through because it's going to alter their entire algorithm, potentially, when they eventually do start to tinker with it. And it's not going to be good for anybody on the platform, at least so we're being told. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And yeah, go check out our video that we released the other day, a timeline of nuclear war. I'll post that link in the description. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening. Canadian Prepper out.